welcome to the marketplace. As I said earlier, did you know that Africa only holds 3% of the global trade share, and this is divided into all the 54 or so countries? You can imagine the amount that Kenya holds, and Africa, through the Africa Union, did decide that they were going to increase trade within the continent by at least 50%. We're currently at 16.6%, but through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, these numbers could have been pushed a little bit higher. However, is this a pipe dream, considering that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area came into effect at around 1st of January in 2021? Are we seeing any differences, especially for micro, small and medium enterprises? I have a very good panel to be discussing this, people that I want to give me insights into the trade, and people who I want to tell me as association heads how they're going to be helping a lot of these businesses venture within the continent. I have Job Wanjohi, who is the head of policy, research and advocacy at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. I have FCPA Robert Wariru, who is the chair Hibaq, and I have Kiplimo Kigen, who is the head of policy, research and advocacy at the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Job, I'll start with you. The Kenya Association of Manufacturers is so big on enhancing trade within the continent from Kenya especially. How exactly is that working out?
Thank you, Hibaq. I've said that, yes, indeed, we have tried as much as possible to entrench our members into the continental trade, and how we look at it is what is called the regional economic blocks.
Right.
Those are the ones that we have been working mostly under. For instance, when you look at the East African community, where we have a custom union, we have as much as possible tried to participate in the policy formulation and ensuring that there is market penetration within that region, whereby you find that as a country, what we export, almost 80% ends up in the East African community.
Right.
And then we also members of COMESA region that has about 25 or 27 countries that subscribe to it. So you find that these are the low-hanging fruits that we have been depending on before the coming up of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which now we are trading at what is called the Guided Trade Initiative. So we have tried as much as possible to drive the policy prescription in terms of the tariff liberalization, in terms of the rules of origin negotiations, but also venturing into that market through what is called the trade missions, so that we can go and look where we have the market opportunity. So the association itself is benefiting out of the African Continental Free Trade Area through the Guided Trade Initiative in terms of export and in terms of import.
All right, we'll be delving into that even further. I have FCPA Robert with me here, Hibaq. Of course, as an FCPA, you do realize that the financial infrastructure globally especially is very much against the global south. We have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which we're trying to push so very much. How exactly is this even practical?
Yeah, thank you, Hibaq, for that. So, you know, like you correctly said, I think the odds are stacked against the global south, you know, historically, really. And I think what businesses, and that's what Job was alluding to here, what businesses in Africa are trying to do is to say, guys, we cannot just keep on complaining. What do we need to do? Can we get to the European level, for example? You know, intra-European trade, especially within the EU, you're talking about almost 70% intra-European trade. And like you correctly said, Africa is about 16%. So why is it that we have these barriers to trade amongst ourselves? And remember, Africa accounts for a significant proportion of the raw materials, even globally. If you're talking about copper, for example, if you're talking about the minerals out of the DRC. So why is it that we cannot trade amongst ourselves? And so this is why the AU Commission came together and said, guys, let us start trading amongst ourselves. And in fact, Hibaq, and probably we'll be delving into this. If you look, there's something that they call the Tripartite Free Trade Area, TFTA, which is a subset of AFCFTA. And so the idea here is, let's bring COMESA, SADC, and EAC into one block. And actually, those three regional economic blocks that Job was talking about account for about 53% of Africa's GDP. So within these small blocks, let us start trading amongst ourselves. And hopefully, you know, through these guided trade initiatives, we can drive development, and Africa can now become sustainable. sustainable. So it's not really a sob story, but I think there is an opportunity there.
We don't want it to be a sob story here. Now, to the Gen Z in my panel, Keegan, if you could just tell us, you are a part of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is big on MSMEs, you know, globalizing themselves. But then, before we go global, we need to think about EAC. We expand to the region, to the African continent. What are some of the things that the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry is pushing on this front?
Thank you, Hibaq. And at the Chamber of Commerce, we support our members to trade across the continent as much as we support them to trade outside the continent.
Right.
And our network through the other chambers of commerce in the other African countries comes in handy,
Right.
Particularly when sourcing for business opportunities, doing due diligence, retrieving payments, and many other ways in which we support these businesses.
Right.
And in the process of doing this, we've realized that a number of things stand out. One is that there is an information gap.
Right.
First, people don't know. You find that companies, businesses, and countries do not know what other countries are producing, at what prices are they producing, at what quality are they producing.
Right.
So that information gap really drives a wedge between Africa trading within itself.
Right.
The other thing that stands out is also logistics.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, if people agree on the pricing, and people agree on the quality and the quantity, then the next thing is to move the products.
Right.
And if there is no means of moving the products, then the transaction cannot happen.
Of course.
So that is one of the areas that we are looking at, and there's a lot that we are doing on that front. We'll be happy to discuss that.
And we shall be discussing that. Gentlemen, let me just go through a few numbers here. Now, as I've said, the Africa share of global trade is at around 3%, and intra-African trade and exports, according to UNCTAD, is 16.6%, around 17% thereabout. Trade between European countries, as you said, FCPA, is at 68.1%, almost 70%. And we have trade between Asian countries at 59.4%, which is essentially 60%. And we have trade between America, within America, that's 55%. These numbers are stacked against, you know, the continent, especially considering as Africans, we do rely on exporting our goods to the European market or even the Asian market because it seems more lucrative for a lot of traders within the continent. For the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, as your policy, when, you know, your members come to you with their products, what advice do you usually give them?
The various products that, the various advisories that we give to our members. One is that the product that you are trying to sell in the international market, they must be standardized.
All right.
Because in the destination market, you're likely to face what is called, for instance, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures
Right.
that are introduced by the receiving states or the destination market so that they can protect themselves against some harmful practices that might be from the producing country. So that's one area that we normally advise them on.
Right.
The other one is, what are the regulatory framework for such a country? What is the digitization level as far as the trade is concerned?
Right.
Because you go to a certain country in Africa or probably to East Asia and there is no digitization that has happened and you need probably to push the paperwork
Right.
As opposed to having an integrated system that has been put in place. The other thing also that we advise our members on is, what are these tariff lines that you can sell? Because, for instance, if you go to a country that is producing motor vehicle,
Right.
and here we are at the initial stage of the motor vehicle production, you find that you are unable to sell because that's the comparative advantage, or they have an advantage as far as the production of that product is concerned in their country. So you're not likely to penetrate that market easily. So you look at Kenya is an industry and basically an agro-based country.
Right.
So you find that the various value chains that we have worked with the members are looking at how probably if it is coffee, it is tea, it is pyrethrum, it is mangoes, it is avocado, which are these destination market that they can sell into and ensure that there is less competition and there is a return on investment and they're getting their money back. So there is also now the trade facilitation angle into it, in terms of accumulation, in terms of bringing goods together so that you have the creative commerce, and by doing so then you are able to reduce on the cost of logistics and the cost of delivering your goods to the market, destination market.
All right. And you know, even trading as a country with other other countries. You know, the president just last week was, you know, presiding over the Forum for China and Africa Cooperation, which was very important for the continent. But let's look within ourselves. Some of our policies sometimes doesn't even, you know, encourage trade within the country, leave alone exporting out of the country. Maybe if you could just tell us, FCPA, when we're looking at our fiscal policies, when we're looking at our tax regimes, which can sometimes be up and down, speaking, you know, a bit practically here, if you could just tell us how exactly does that impact the general welfare of exportation?
Yeah, that's a good question, Hibaq. Now, for any business, it doesn't matter which business you are in. What you need is stability in terms of policy. And this is the reason why businesses are asking policymakers or government, let's have an indication of the policy direction in the next 3 to 5 years, so that, you know, you can plan your manufacturing, for example, you can plan your raw material procurement, you can plan if it's mining and so on. So these investors want to do that. And I like your point, because even in Kenya, if you look at the county governments, perhaps there are some proposals that they present that stifle trade within the country, because then, you know, if I'm moving a product from one county to another, then I have to pay this, you know, advertising fees and then those kind of things. So there is a challenge, and we agree with that. However, two things give me a bit of comfort. Number one is a national tax policy. And if you look at that national tax policy, it is actually calling on government to take a long-term view about tax proposals or even policies and say, let us roll out this, let us look at the potential impact, and let us reevaluate. That's number one. Number two, I think if you look at our constitution, it talks about our international obligations. And I think this is where, for example, AFCFTA comes in.
Right.
And we are saying we want to plug into the international space and abide by our obligations. And if you look at, for example, even the way the rollout of AFCFTA,
right,
East Africa community, and particularly Kenya, was very, very much involved in coming up with what they're calling Category A items. Right. And you'll see the reduction of duties up to 2030.
Right.
So as a country, I think we are on the right path in terms of policy perspective. We just need that little nudge to ensure that it's not inconsistent, because that really is a problem.
All right. I'm so curious, FCPA, if you would maybe indulge me. We know that the Finance Act 2023 will come to a conclusive decision in the courts very soon. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Hibaq, you know, I'm a lawyer, and it's commenting on matters that are live before court. But I think it raises very fundamental issues, especially around public participation.
Right.
And the reason why that is so critical is because if you look at, we're talking about customs and international trade. Mm-hmm. If you look at the changes that came in Finance Act, or in 2024 around customs, East Africa Community Customs, right, there is a question about whether there was public participation. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that the Supreme Court guides us on what exactly is required in terms of public participation. Right. So we are clear about that. But like you, right, I'm very curious to see the outcome of that.
And the curiosity will be quenched very soon. The other lawyer in the room, maybe if you could just tell us, Keegan, some of the things that, you know, FCPA has highlighted is the need to have a sort of stable working ground so that people can get, you know, to explore and even export some of their goods. As the KNCCI, you have said that there is an information gap. What exactly are you doing to plug these gaps to ensure some of these things, when the policies are there, could be beneficial to the trader?
Thank you, Hibaq. First, a little bit on the Finance Act of 20.
Right.
I think Job would agree with me that there's some very sinister items on excise which we would love for it to go away, right, which is bedeviling our manufacturers. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, before I go into that, Hibaq, my colleague mentioned about the TFTA.
Right.
And the question that our members have been asking us is that this is the 4th year of operationalization, implementation of the AFCFTA.
Right.
54 countries have signed it, 47 have ratified, but then we've come up with now the TFTA, which is a level above COMESA and EAC, but below AFCFTA.
Right.
So the question that has been raised is that, are we introducing an extra layer? I thought we were going straight to the continent, you know, doing things.
Just jump into it.
Absolutely.
Very Gen Z of you.
So I think we need a lot of intentionality from our governments, because we did set the target, 1st of January 2021, that AFCFTA is going to be implemented, and I think we should continue with that target.
All right.
back to the question on the information gap. One of the things that we do at the Chamber of Commerce is that we've got market intelligence series, and we actually share these a lot with people who are not even members, so it's available on all our platforms and our website.
Right.
And the market intelligence series is simply a basic, gives you information on, for example, the export of avocado.
All right.
What do you need to export avocado? Because you've got, Hibaq, I'll tell you, there's a huge appetite for export of products.
Right.
Kenyan businesses are very much want to export the products, so we give them this information. If it's macadamia, these are the export processes.
Right.
This is where you'd find a market. These are the prices. These are the top destinations within and outside the continent for these particular products.
Right.
But even at that, there's a key question, because if I am an export-ready MSME, I've never exported.
Right.
And I have the products ready. In fact, I have the market. So how do I get my products to the other part of the continent?
Exactly.
And last week, we had an engagement. We had an exporters roundtable where we brought in exporters, our members and our non-members, and we had a conversation still under AFCFTA. What are the opportunities under AFCFTA and what are the challenges?
Right.
And one of the things that stood out is one of the hindrances for export to other countries is actually logistics, as I mentioned.
Right.
And I know you spoke about China. The reason why today you can import a necklace from China, just a single piece of necklace, is because of consolidation of cargo.
Right.
Because there's huge traffic between Mombasa and China. And there's always a flight every day. There's always cargo moving around the sea. So that consolidation of cargo, what it does is that it reduces the cost of logistics. And logistics as a cost is an anchor where you find things like warehousing, insurance, also tend to reduce in cost once you've consolidated cargo.
Right.
The reason why you cannot import that single piece of necklace from, let's say, Burkina Faso is how many cargo flights are there between Kenya and Burkina Faso, and even through the sea, how much traffic is there.
Right.
So it poses the chicken and egg question. So how do we create this pipeline? And this is where we employ and submit that our governments need to make an investment.
All right.
They need to incentivize companies that consolidate cargo, because that is one of the key drivers for AFCFTA to succeed.
All right. Job, indulge me here for a minute. You know, Keegan has said that there are sinister things within that Finance Act that, you know, that is raising your heckle, so to speak. So maybe if you could just talk about that. And as you tell me that he has talked about, you know, consolidating of cargo and how difficult it is for that, I do know that, you know, the Arabian Peninsula were thinking of bringing some of their companies from, you know, their regions and setting up their warehouses right here so that they can manufacture here and then export afterwards. Could that be a way to, you know, enhance industrialization within the country?
Yes. Bringing various production goods together at one point, which is called aggregation, is quite critical, because it reduces on the costs of production.
Right.
And cost of production is like what Keegan is talking about. That is one component that can really drive the uncompetitiveness of the goods that are being produced.
Right.
So that aggregation is quite critical, so that you are able to drive now the critical mass. And once you are able now to drive the critical mass, you realize that goods hit the destination market at a cheaper cost.
Right.
But now when you look at, like now, the case of Africa, we don't have our own ships that can go around the continent from the port of Mombasa to ports in South Africa, going to the west of Africa. We don't have that. When you look at internally, like in the land, look at our roads connectivity. Again, they're a bit wanting. If you look again at our air transport, some of the planes, like now living here, JKIA, they have have to go all the way to Dubai before they go again to the south of Africa, rather than traversing to Tanzania, Zambia, and then you go to the southern Africa.
Right.
So you find that connectivity is a major issue. Even in terms of telecommunication, you find that we don't have a unified telecommunication system across Africa.
Right.
So railway lines, again, they are disintegrated. What we are using in Kenya is different from what is being used in Uganda, and it's different from what is used in countries in West Africa. So all that has brought some problems in terms of the movement of goods and services from one point to the other.
Right.
But if we can be able to bring the or to do the consolidation, we are able to have 250 containers rather than to have only one container. We can be able to contract even the military here in Kenya to make one ship for us that will be moving around from the port of Mombasa to the rest of Africa, and then when it's coming back, it's able again to consolidate from the rest of Africa back to the country. So it's quite integral, but now it requires the resolution, serious political resolution, economic resolution, and also aggregating and ensuring that all the African minds are speaking together.
Right. Yeah. Government goodwill is very important in this case as well. Yeah. Do you believe that some of the things that you are mentioning, if you would forward them to the government, do you believe that it could be, actioned?
Yes, I believe it can be actioned, and some of these require some continental approach, whereby you go to a meeting whereby there are various head of states, and you can hear that they are recognizing some of these challenges, like now the physical infrastructure. When you're talking about catalyzing physical infrastructure in the country, ensuring that probably we have the movement of goods and services through the ships or through the sea, you find that the government is wanting to do this. But again, you find they are stifled. They don't have enough resources to be able to support the continental agenda against their national agenda. Right. Like now, if you look at the debt case in the country, or you look at our budget, it's always we're in the deficit. If you look at the budget that we had this year, we have 3.7 trillion as the budget. The collection is expected at about 2.7 trillion shillings. Right. There's a deficit. So if we are operating at a surplus, you'll find that now the government is likely to lift its head higher to be able to think continentally and support the initiative at that level. So the government is willing to do this, but you find majority of them, like now in Africa, they don't have the legroom, financial legroom to be able to do this. All
right. As you said, there is a deficit, when it comes to the budget. The Finance Act is going to fill this deficit. What do you believe? What do you think about the Finance Act 2023?
The Finance Act 2023, and again, like what Robert has said, it's something that is already in court. Right. And we are waiting for the final determination on the same. Right. But there's some areas that we had public reservations on it, in terms of export promotion investment levy. You go to some excess duty that have been charged in it. So I'll not deep dive into it very much, but we are looking at how collectively as a country, we can look at how some of these can be changed, because part of it was even included in the finance bill 2024 that was rejected, because the government wanted to reverse the negative impact that some of the clauses the Finance Act 2023 has on the economy.
All right, let's delve into TFTA for a moment here, Robert. You did say that now it's no longer surface level. We are trying to iron out the details in between countries. One of the biggest deterrents of exportation between countries is the levies and tariffs that are paid through the borders, right? And different countries have different policies that usually clash in this respect. And that's one of the barriers that we have to actualizing AfCFTA. What would you recommend? Yeah, that's a good question, Hibaq. Now, the first thing to understand is there'll always be a dispute amongst countries. Why? Because customs revenue is an integral proportion of the domestic revenue, or the revenue that is generated by a country. So if you look at it, for example, if you look at last year, Kenya collected 2.4 trillion. Of which about 790 or so billion was customs duties. So if you're telling Kenya, guys, we're now importing from Nigeria, or we're importing from Zimbabwe, and we are no longer going to be collecting duties, this is a big problem. And this is the reason why you see an initiative like, and I do take the point that Kiplimo has made, that we need to be moving faster. Absolutely. Right. However, the idea behind the TFTA is, maybe I should step back a bit and say, AfCFTA has got 8 regional blocks. Right.
Now, what TFTA has done, bringing in these three, which account for 53% of the global, of the African trade, the idea is, let us use these three to remove the barriers. And like you've correctly said, we sit down, let's look at a schedule of bringing down these duties. And I'll give you a good example. Something like sorghum. Currently, if you are to import sorghum, is 25%.
Right.
And the idea is, let's move that down to 0%, which means that, for example, Kenya Revenue Authority will collect less if we are importing sorghum and that kind of a thing.
Right.
And so the idea is, let's work towards a common framework where everybody reduces those tariffs.
Right.
And so we can then engender the inter-African trade.
Right.
And one point that I just wanted to add to Job's point around offshoring or bringing in manufacturing capacity.
Right.
These guys are not operating in a vacuum. Actually, if you look at the statistics, no less the UN statistics, they say that Africa in 2100 will have the highest population, working population. They'll also have the highest consumer population.
Right.
So it's about time that we actually brought manufacturing capacity in Africa, trade in Africa, so that we can develop and generate products for Africans, because there is capacity.
All right, there is capacity. As you know, the FCPA has talked about intra-regional trade could be, one of the low-hanging fruits that could be achieved within this time. And if you look at intra-regional economic community trade, we see that SADC has around $34.7 billion in trade. We see that SENSAD has $18.7 billion in trade, and that's in dollars. ECOWAS, $11.4 billion. We have COMESA, $10.7 billion. We have AMU, $4.2 billion. We have EAC, $3.1 billion. We have IGAD, $2.5 billion. And we have ECAS at $0.8 billion. When it comes to this, Keegan, when we look at these regional trading blocks, if we just started with those ones and then expanded outwards before we launch ourselves into AFCFTA, we could achieve this. What would you say would be more strategic regionally if these, trading blocks would be added together in comparison to just deep diving into AFTA without, prerequisite?
Yeah, so I'd say one of our biggest challenges with AFCFTA has actually been intentionality, because you've got about 7 countries or so who have not ratified. Now, ratified means you put in the actual instruments, that dictates the actual trading that is done to allow for the implementation. Now, these 7 African countries, first there's a conversation of why haven't they, are we reading from different scripts,
Right.
Where's the challenge?
Right.
And business people want to trade, and there's a huge appetite for that, as I said. But currently, as it is, and this is actually something that I'm observing a lot with some of our members who are expanding within the continent, is that they are working with what they would call anchor markets.
Right.
So for example, if you want to enter the EAC market, then you come and you enter Kenya first, because when I enter Kenya, I'll be able to access South Sudan and all the other markets.
Right.
And West Africa is the same. You probably go to Senegal, Nigeria, and then you can hit both francophone and anglophone West Africa. South Africa, the story goes on and on.
Right.
But then you realize that the narrative will still continue. People will just stick with the anchor markets, and nobody will make the encroachment into the other African countries.
Right.
And that is why we need that level of intentionality. But suffice to say, I still encourage the anchor market model,
Right.
because that is then a smoother way of making an entry into the whole of Africa if for the businesses that are looking to do that.
All right. Now, of course, you can interact with us on our socials at TV47 News, at TV47KE on Facebook and X. You can also send me some of your comments at Hibaq Said on both of those social media sites. Let me just go through one of the questions. Someone is asking, CAM and KNCCI should tell us how we are positioning the country for the increased market under AFCFTA. Are there any specific policies to benefit the country from it? I'll start with you, Job.
Yes. One thing is that if you want to penetrate the market, you must ensure that at the negotiation table you are seated there. Like today, we have the Association of Manufacturers, staff members seated in Arusha today to negotiate on what is called Category B and Category C. You heard Robert talking of Category A, whereby Category A is immediate liberalization. Category B is liberalization within a certain period, I think 7 years. No, it's 7%, but it's going to be liberalized within a certain period of 10 to 13 years. And then there's another Category C, there's no liberalization at all, because these are products that we have abundance production in the country, and we don't want them to come from other countries within Africa. And this is agreed. You find that also South Africa, the product that they put in Category C, they say these products we are not going to allow any importation into South Africa or into Zambia or into Cote d'Ivoire, because we have abundance production. So to start off, we have to ensure that we are participating in the negotiation, because if we negotiate poorly, you find that, like now, agricultural-based products will penetrate the Kenyan market. Eggs, talk about the poultry products, talk about maize, talk about sugar, and consequently, this will have an effect on the farmers themselves. So we have ensured that as a country and as manufacturers, from my perspective, are well represented. And then over and above that, then we do market intelligence. We do market penetration analysis to ensure that now the tariffs that we have negotiated with Cote d'Ivoire, or we have negotiated with Nigeria, and we've seen that they have done what is called immediate liberalization of the market. Then we come and advise our members that when you go to Nigeria, these products you can sell immediately at the AFCTA, so that now we see the movement of goods from Kenya to the rest of the continent.
All right, Keegan?
Yeah. One of the things that we are pushing for at the regional level together with our partners is the harmonization of standards across the continent. Because it's become very cumbersome when you're dealing with the whole market and you're dealing with 54 countries and all of them have got different standards of a product. So the ideal that we want to see and the dream for us is that the harmonization of standards to a point where if a product is approved by the Kenya Bureau of Standards, then it is accepted all across the other markets. That would really be a good point in advancing trade. But even at that, one of the things that we're encouraging our members to do is that there needs to be a good amount of selflessness in moving across the markets. And what I mean by that is that if, for example, I am producing shoes and you are doing paper, and Job is doing glasses, why don't we, instead of me trying to enter the Mali market all by myself, why don't I have a container and you can bring the paper, you can bring the glass. We are not competitors, are we? Right? And we can put it in one container and we can find one distributor in Mali, and that is the practical way in which we are going to grow and allow Africa to trade within itself. So that is the selflessness bit that is required.
Now, Robert, you'd agree with me that expanding regionally is a double-edged sword. Of course, there's the expanded markets, but there's also a possibility of disenfranchising some of the traders that we have within the country ourselves. Now, when it comes to foreign exchange and stabilizing foreign exchange, you might find that our importation is much higher than our exportation. How exactly do you believe the government should stabilize this?
Well, I think a couple of points there, Hibaq. And the first one really has to be, because it's about, and Kiplimo talked about it, comparative advantage. So we've got to look at what is it that we can produce at the cheapest rate possible, then we are competitive internationally, because that's the bottom line of international trade, and that's the reason why he talked about sourcing from China, for example. And I think as a country, we then also need to look at our costs of production, our factors of production, whether you're talking about electricity. I do not understand why it is cheaper to import eggs from Uganda, for example. We need to look at our cost structure and say, this is what is hindering our competitiveness as a country. Now, to your point around the stability, I think one of the things that AFCFTA and the African Development Bank has piloted, and to a large extent I think is going to be very useful, is what they call the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS, which means I do not actually need to look for dollars to pay for the distributor, for my supplier from say Mali, when they give me cocoa or whatever it is. So I don't need, I just take my Kenya shillings to the bank. African Development Bank will remit the currency, let's say it's a Naira, to the Nigerian supplier without us using the dollar.
Right.
And I think that de-dollarization is a conversation that must be had now. And with that, then we all stop looking for the dollar. All we want is, I will trade, I will get my Kenya shillings, and I will continue investing. He will trade, he will get his Naira, and like that. And so I think the issue of the foreign exchange for intra-African trade will cease being a big issue, and now we'll only be talking about we need dollars to buy the oil from, for example, Saudi Arabia, right. Or we need dollars to buy, or euros to buy hardware or software from the West. And so I think that will cease being a major issue given the solutions that are coming through. But for sure, from a policy perspective, we all need to sit on the table, at the table, and agree these are the challenges that we have, and we sort of put our self-interest a bit to the side and say we need to address this, because really that is the biggest problem. Everybody is trying to protect their market.
I'm glad you brought up de-dollarization, and we did say that we don't want this to be a sob story, so I'll try to be as objective as possible. When it comes to the global financial infrastructure, we find that a lot of our presidents in the African continent, and even Dr. William Ruto, our own president, was talking about how that particular infrastructure is so bad for the global south, especially African countries. Could there be a way that there could be more collaboration within the continent to promote better infrastructure, especially financially, to ensure that we can trade within ourselves much better? We don't need to depend on, you know, the global north.
Well, I think there are opportunities. You know, if you're talking about the infrastructure that he talked, that Kiplimo talked about, whether it's roads, whether it's allowing free movement of labor, because that's the other thing. You see, and if you look at actually the protocol that establishes AFCFTA, it actually does have a section on free movement of labor and services, right. Because it's not just about manufacturing goods; it's about moving capability. If I'm sitting in Kenya and I have capability to resolve an issue that is in Chad, for example, I should actually be able to move to Chad very quickly. Right. If you're talking about open skies for Africa, again, it's about ensuring that you can engender trade very easily. So I think the whole objective here is we're starting with goods, but there are also these other components of trade, finance, availability of this finance. And for example, if you look at Afri-Exim, is it supporting this? What we've just talked about, ADB talking about PAPs. Right. So I think when all those things come together and we realize, especially that we are in a very good place as far as the population is concerned in Africa. I mean, you're talking about over 1 billion people. Right. That is a market sufficient for Africans alone. So I think those are some of the things that we probably need to be talking about and ensuring, you know, to use Kiplimo's terms, right. We run actually. We run towards that, right. Because there is an opportunity.
All right. Now let's focus on the East African community. This is the regional trading bloc that we are within ourselves, and the countries increased trade within or with the rest of Africa by more than $600 million to $4.3 billion, and that was in the fourth quarter of 2023. Pesaiko, 14% average annual trade growth we're seeing within this particular, you know, EAC. We're seeing that cross-border trade within the region recorded a 12% rise, and trade with the East, we're seeing that exports from Kenya to China is over $300 million in comparison to importation from China, which is almost $4 billion. The trade imbalance is crazy, but let's focus on EAC. Job, you did say that, you know, we export mostly to the East African community, more than 80% of our goods. One would say that this would be a good learning ground to expand into, you know, the African continent. How exactly could we push this trade even further within the EAC?
No, you find that we have different levels of economic integration. When you're talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area, it is a free trade area. But when you come to the East African community, we have what is called the Custom Union and a common market that is operating within that space. So you find that within the Custom Union, there is a free movement of goods and services without paying any duties, provided the goods are originating. So one lesson that we have to pick from there, because that's what has been very integral for us, is to ensure that at the African level, we are also integrating as fast as possible. Today we are talking of an FTA, free trade area. We came from a preferential trade trade area. We come now to the common market. We come to the Custom Union. We get now to the monetary union, to the economic integration, even to the federation. So you find East African community over time has been able to make these strides. If Africa, again, we can be able to do that, and then we come up with the right protocols that are like now the rules of origin. We come up with a tariff book that is looking at the common external tariff, whereby now it is budgeted raw materials at 0%. We get to the intermediate products at 10 or 25%, the finished products. You'll find that within African region, we will be able to trade more than we are trading today, because you find a good that is being produced in Kenya is being transferred to Tanzania without paying any duty. But the same good that is coming from China, it's paying 25% or that 5% duty. So you find that there is preferential treatment of the goods that are within the East African community. If you're able to do that, you see now at the African level, you see the increment of the inter-African trade from where it is 16%. We can even get to the EU level of 68 or 70%, because we have been able now to block the goods that are coming from the rest of the world. So we have very good lessons that we have picked from the EAC community, which can be replicated at the continental level.
All right. And when it comes to that, Robert, we're seeing, of course, we do export to, within EAC. We're doing well on that front. There is 4.3 billion in the last quarter of 2023, which is a major number to look at. However, when it comes to importation from China, we're seeing over almost $4 billion in Kenya alone. That is what we import into the country. What are some of the things that is debilitating some of our businesses from, trading as well within the East African region in comparison to, importing from the Asian country?
Well, I think there are several things, Hibaq. One, historically, we've had a challenge in terms of intellectual property or the knowledge around the productive sectors. And that's part of the reason why you see, for example, microchips are being manufactured in the Far East versus we have the raw materials in Africa. Why can't we produce them in Africa or something like that? And the other things that I think that are probably challenging for us as Kenya, and the reason why we have got such huge a huge trade imbalance, is if you look at the cost of electricity, for example. We do have an opportunity, I think, to harness the African electricity pool, because some of these countries, for example, even if you look at Ethiopia, massive amounts of electricity. If you look at Egypt, massive amounts of electricity. Can they distribute to the deficit areas? I think they can. If you look at something like the cost of labor, I think Kenya, or Africa for that matter, has got a huge advantage. If you remember, production used to be in China, and then it moved a bit into Vietnam because China has now become a bit expensive. And now most of these manufacturers are looking to Africa because this is the next frontier. I was very surprised that Africa has got about 60% of the employable global population. So this is definitely the place to be. And I feel that if we take advantage of some of these initiatives or some of these opportunities, we should be able to redefine that narrative, so that now we are no longer importing 4 billion worth from China. But actually, because we've got the raw materials, we've got the facilities to manufacture, we can actually export that. And because we also have a market, we don't need to even export to China, we can consume that internally. So I think if we address some of those challenges, and I keep going back to the whole issue of policy consistency, because without policy consistency, he's talked about rules of origin. We need to be clear about that, so that even as I'm going into manufacturing, then I know where my markets are, how I can access them.
All right. Keegan, of course, the KNCCI does have offices in China. What are some of the things that you facilitate between Kenya and China in that respect, especially when it comes to MSMEs? Is there a way that this trade imbalance could come towards Kenya at least a little bit?
Thank you, Hibaq. Before I forget, we are actually going to have a trade mission to Zambia.
Right.
From the 17th to the 22nd of November. So for those who are interested to explore the Zambia market, to find partners there, to source for products, or even to take your products there,
right.
Please reach out to us at kenyachamber.or.ke and we'll be able to work with you on that.
Right.
Yes, we opened our China office last year in October, and I was just talking to my colleagues there, and I think we've facilitated about $3 million worth of trade, and this is actually from Kenya to China in terms of exports, majority of it being fresh produce. So what that office does is one, it supports Kenyans who want to export to the China market, and I think we've done a good amount of work in mushrooms, macadamia. Our macadamia exports to China in 2023 actually grew by 20x, which was really amazing. Avocado, and speaking about avocado, we'll actually be having a training session on the 18th of September on do you want to export avocado to China?
Right.
So our team from China will be telling businesses all about the export process, the standards, the logistics, and so on and so forth. Please check our social media for that information. Now, the China office also supports businesses who are looking to source machinery from China into Kenya. And one of the interesting things that is always glaring at us is the gap that we have in terms of the trade deficit. And our China office is doing a lot of work in terms of capacity building, facilitating that trade, particularly moving products from Kenya to China to be able to bridge that gap.
Right.
But one of the things that's very evident for me is that, you see, looking at AFCFTA and comparing it to China in a way, if we could draw parallels, Africa will not trade with itself just because they're being told to.
Right.
Business is all about competitiveness.
Right.
If Zimbabwe can source textile at a cheaper rate from China, then you can jump up and down and whatever, but they will never source it from Kenya.
Right.
So it's not just a matter of trading because, you know, we are people of the same continent and we share a lot in terms of culture and
the sob story that Robert was talking
about. Yes, it has to be competitive because business is all about maximizing profit. So it has to be competitive, and I've heard the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, talking about why people are going to China. And he said that it's not because there's cheap labor in China. If anything, there's cheaper labor in Africa than in China today.
Right.
It's because also of the skill that is there in China. So that speaks to also the investment that the government needs to make in this part of the world to be able to get to that level.
All right.
And even speaking about that, Hibaq, you find that one of the things that I would really love to see from China, we've obviously proven to China that there's a market here for their products.
Right.
We are continuing to prove to them that they can source products from here. But even more importantly, where we need to do a lot of work is to convince them that that this is an investment destination. Because if you look at Kenya, for example, all the FDI that came to Kenya in 2022, China only accounted for 1.2%. While Africa accounted for 29%. So we need more investments from China, not just the products, we need investments here.
All right. Gentlemen, unfortunately, our time is up. I will give the both of you a minute each to close. Job, what are your closing statements?
My closing statement is on, we have very big potential as a country to do international trade in Africa and also with, in the Far East. And what we need to do is to ensure that we are developing our value chains in the country so that the issue of forex is checked and ensuring that we're retaining as much as value in the country, whereby now we're able to create more jobs and investments that are being driven by trade.
All right, Robert?
Yeah, Hibaq, Kenya and Ghana were the first countries to sign AFCFTA agreement. I would like to see Kenya take the lead in terms of optimizing the opportunities that come from that, be it from production, from trade, from free movement of labor. And so we hope and look forward to policies that will engender that.
All right, Kigen, a one-liner.
Yeah, for FCFTA to succeed, intentionality, 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 but competitiveness, let competitiveness be our true north.
All right, do not be a sore loser. Be intentional about your trade. And maybe the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement could be a dream that some of us could be taking advantage of, especially when it comes to our small traders. Our MSMEs could be the next frontier when it comes to trade growth, not only in this country but in the continent. But for now, it's going to be good night from us here. The marketplace has been a very, very scintillating conversation. Until next week, have yourselves a very lovely night. My name is Hibaq Said.